Blair Evans had exactly 9 blocks to outrun disaster, and she was doing it barefoot. The morning air was thick with the kind of humidity that made everything feel heavier: clothes, skin, even hope. Blair Evans sprinted down the cracked sidewalks of downtown Seattle, the soles of her bare feet slapping against the pavement with desperate rhythm. Her shoes, traitorous sandals bought on clearance 2 summers ago, dangled uselessly from her hand. One heel had snapped half a block back, sending her stumbling into a trash can before she decided to abandon them completely. She couldn't afford a taxi, couldn't risk waiting for another bus, couldn't even slow down long enough to breathe. 9 blocks stood between her and ZNK Corporation, the place that, if she played every card right, might just turn her life around. Her lungs burned, but her thoughts burned hotter. Rent was already 2 months behind, the eviction notice like a neon sign on her kitchen counter. The fridge, mostly empty, mocked her with its silence every night. The power bill was threatening to shut her lights off by the weekend. This interview wasn't just an opportunity, it was survival. Blair's bangs clung to her forehead, damp with sweat. She darted past a man walking a golden retriever, swerved around a food cart, muttered apologies to pedestrians who scowled as she blew past. The city blurred into nothing more than obstacles between her and that glittering lobby where her future hung by a thread. She was so locked into her tunnel vision that she didn't see him until it was too late. Bam! It was like running into a brick wall disguised as a human. The impact sent her flying backwards, the straps of her tote snapping against her shoulder. Papers spilled into the air, fluttering down like oversized snowflakes. Resumes, cover letters, even the bus schedule she hadn't used. She hit the ground hard enough that the sting radiated up her spine, the world tilting in a dizzy blur. "Oh, for crying out loud!" she burst out, scrambling on her knees to gather her papers. Her cheeks were already hot, humiliation tightening around her throat. The man she'd collided with straightened slowly, brushing his immaculate dark suit as though her existence had smeared dust on his sleeve. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with hair so precisely styled it might have required a contract with gravity. In one hand he held an expensive phone, screen still lit. He hadn't even dropped it. His eyes, sharp and cool as steel, glanced at her with the impatience of someone accustomed to the world getting out of his way. "Don't you watch where you're going?" Blair snapped, still kneeling, still frantically stacking the papers that now looked like they'd been trampled by a stampede. "You're the one running like a maniac," he said, his tone flat and unforgiving. He didn't even kneel to help. Blair froze for a heartbeat, her hands gripping a crumpled page. Fury surged through her chest. She looked up at him, sweat-streaked, barefoot, papers clutched like a lifeline, and saw nothing but stone on his face. Not sympathy, not even mild regret, just irritation. "You broke my heel," she said, voice cracking with the edge of panic and shame. She held up the twisted sandal as proof. "Now what? How am I supposed to walk into an interview like this? This was my chance." Her voice wavered, the weight of it all pressing down. You arrogant snob." For the first time, something shifted in his expression. Not much, just the faintest raise of an eyebrow. "If you're really good," he replied coolly, "a broken heel won't stop you." Blair blinked at him, stunned by the audacity. "Wow, inspiring. Have you ever thought about selling cheap motivational quotes on mugs?" He gave the barest twitch of what could have been a smile, or maybe just annoyance at being forced to listen longer than necessary. Without another word, he turned and walked away, his polished shoes clicking confidently against the pavement. Blair sat there for a beat longer, clutching her broken sandal, the taste of humiliation bitter on her tongue. Her stomach twisted. She wanted to cry, to scream, to just give up, but giving up wouldn't pay the rent. She dragged in a deep breath, stuffed the rest of her papers back into her tote, and stood. Then, with a defiant lift of her chin, she yanked off the other sandal, clutched both in her hand, and started running again, barefoot, heart pounding, humiliation trailing her like a shadow. 9 blocks never felt longer. Blair's heart hammered in her chest as she stepped into the marble lobby of ZNK Corporation. The floor gleamed so brightly it reflected her own barefoot silhouette back at her, a humiliating reminder of how unprepared she looked. She forced herself to stand tall, clutching her broken sandals in one hand like they were trophies from a war she hadn't chosen to fight. The receptionist blinked twice when she approached, her eyes flicking down to Blair's bare feet. "Interview for executive assistant," Blair said quickly, her voice only just managing not to crack. "Blair Evans." The woman typed something on her tablet, her manicured nails tapping like tiny hammers against Blair's confidence. "Down the hall," she finally said, but her raised eyebrow delivered a different message. "Good luck. You'll need it." Blair pushed through the heavy glass doors into the waiting room and froze. 25 candidates filled the space, every single one immaculate. Silk blouses, power heels, tailored dresses. They looked like they'd rehearsed this moment their entire lives. Compared to them, Blair was chaos wrapped in clearance rack polyester. A couple of women glanced up, eyes widening at her shoeless entrance. One muffled a laugh behind her hand. Another tilted her phone just so, the camera catching Blair's awkward figure. A whisper rippled, "Is she seriously barefoot?" Blair's face burned. She sank into the nearest empty chair, tucking her shoes behind her bag like smuggling contraband. "You're here. That's what matters," she told herself. "Say the right words and maybe, just maybe, they'll forget the rest." The sharp echo of footsteps silenced the room. They were deliberate, steady, commanding, the kind of footsteps that made the air itself straighten. Blair looked up and her blood ran cold. Him. Mr. Arrogant, fancy suit. The man she'd collided with on the sidewalk. The one who'd left her scrambling on the pavement with broken shoes and broken pride. His tailored suit looked even sharper under the office lights, and his face carried the same carved-from-stone detachment. Blair's mouth moved before her brain could stop it. "Oh no," she blurted. "Not you again, Mr. Arrogant Fancy Suit." The silence was instant. Some candidates gasped softly, others stifled laughter. Phones tilted, screens glowing as though ready to capture her downfall. Derek Crawford, though Blair didn't yet know his name, turned his head toward her with the slow, deliberate movement of a predator acknowledging a noise in the grass, his eyes locked on hers, cold, assessing. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. His stare alone was enough to send her stomach lurching. Then with perfect calm, he continued walking, disappearing into the hall as though she were nothing more than a forgettable obstacle. Blair wanted the ground to open beneath her, to swallow her whole. She imagined headlines. Barefoot disaster, humiliates herself at interview. She gripped her bag so tightly her knuckles whitened. It's over, she thought. You're finished before you've even begun. Minutes dragged like hours. Then the receptionist reappeared. Blair Evans? Her name cracked through the air like thunder. Every eye turned to her. She stood, knees shaking, and walked the hallway like a soldier headed to a battlefield. Barefoot, unpolished, every whisper behind her growing louder. She stepped into the interview room and stopped breathing. There he was, seated at the head of the long table, papers in front of him, was the man from the sidewalk. The man she'd insulted twice now. His gaze lifted, steady, unreadable. Blair's chest tightened, panic clawing at her ribs. Of all the people in the world, of all the interviews, of all the mornings to snap a shoe, she had collided with him. And now she realized with horror, he wasn't just another executive. He was the CEO, her potential future boss. And in that suspended moment, Blair Evans understood. This was no ordinary interview. This was a war for her dignity, her survival, maybe even her entire future. The interview room smelled faintly of leather and power. A long mahogany table stretched across the space, lined with chairs that seemed designed to intimidate rather than comfort. Blair's breath caught when her eyes landed on him. Derek Crawford, seated at the head like a king in his throne. His hands rested neatly on a stack of resumes, his dark eyes skimming over them with the detached calm of someone used to holding people's futures in his grasp. Blair forced her legs to move, her bare feet whispering against the polished floor. She took a seat across from him, painfully aware of how out of place she looked. Every nerve in her body screamed that she didn't belong. He glanced up slowly, pinning her with a look that stripped away every layer of bravado she tried to wear. His voice, when he finally spoke, was sharp enough to slice the silence. "Blair Evans," he said, as if testing the sound of her name. He flipped through her resume with the same interest a man might give to yesterday's mail. Coffee shop, clothing store, pet store. His eyebrow ticked upward. "And you think this qualifies you to sit in front of me?" Blair's throat tightened. For a moment, she considered apologizing for even showing up. But then something inside her sparked. Stubbornness, maybe, or sheer survival instinct. She leaned forward, chin high. "Not exactly the corporate ladder, I know," she said. "But every one of those jobs taught me something your perfect resumes won't show. The coffee shop taught me how to handle people before they've had caffeine, which is basically surviving a war zone. The clothing store taught me patience, especially when someone insists they're a size small when they're clearly not. And the pet store," she smiled just a little, "I learned how to calm down nervous creatures, cats, dogs, CEOs who knock people over on sidewalks." The room went still. Derek's gaze sharpened, his lips twitching almost imperceptibly. Around the table, the other executives shifted, clearly not used to this level of irreverence. You do realize, he said, his voice low and deliberate, this position requires professionalism, discretion, and competence. Blair met his eyes, her pulse thundering. I do, and I can bring all of that, but I'll bring it with humanity too. Because let's face it, this place looks like it runs on fear and coat hangers stuck in people's spines. Maybe what you really need is someone who can loosen the knots before the whole place snaps. A ripple of surprise moved through the panel. Derek's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, something she couldn't read. Interest? Amusement? Or maybe irritation that she wasn't cowering like the others. Tell me about your weaknesses, he pressed. Blair laughed, though her voice wobbled. Seriously? Look at me. I walked in here barefoot. I just called you arrogant in front of a room full of candidates. My biggest professional win so far has been convincing a French bulldog to take a bath. I think my weaknesses are pretty obvious. A murmur of stifled chuckles broke the tension. Even one of the board members covered his mouth to hide a smile. And your strengths? Derek asked, leaning forward, his gaze drilling into her. Blair inhaled sharply, then steadied herself. I don't give up. I could have quit when I broke my heel. I could have walked out when I realized you were the CEO, but I'm still here because I believe I deserve a chance and because I'm good at turning chaos into order. It's a natural talent. The silence that followed stretched so long Blair thought she'd gone too far. Her palms itched, her heart pounded. Then Derek set her resume down, his fingers drumming lightly against the table. Why? He said at last. Should I hire someone with no corporate experience, no polish, and no clear reason to be here? Blair swallowed hard, forcing herself not to look away. Because experience can be learned, attitude can't, and I have attitude in spades. Besides, I bet everyone else you'll interview today will give you the same answers. Perfect resumes, perfect rehearsed speeches. I'm different, and sometimes different is exactly what you need. The room held its breath. Derek's eyes lingered on her, unreadable but unrelenting. Then softly, almost like a thought he hadn't meant to say out loud, he murmured, Interesting, very interesting, F. Or the first time Blair saw something behind his carefully built wall of control. Not softness, not exactly, but recognition. A spark of something he wasn't used to feeling. And though she couldn't explain why, her humiliation began to shift into something else, something dangerous, something powerful. The days after the interview blurred into a strange new reality for Blair Evans. She had expected rejection, maybe even a mocking story shared around ZNK's glittering halls, the barefoot girl who thought she could belong here. Instead, she found herself seated at a desk outside the CEO's office, clutching a staff badge she was sure would disintegrate in her hands at any second. Her workspace was neat, clinical, too polished for her mismatched pens and thrift store notebook. Derek Crawford's name gleamed in gold letters across the door in front of her, a constant reminder of the impossible path her life had just taken. The first week was chaos. She spilled coffee, thankfully empty, across a set of merger documents, answered the phone with, Zen, this is Blair, and re-alphabetized files that were supposed to be chronological. Every mistake sent a ripple of muffled laughter through the office. But then something happened that no one expected. Blair's clumsy disasters came paired with wild, ingenious fixes. She turned the broken air conditioner into a functioning cooling system with nothing more than a desk fan and binder clips. She smoothed over an angry client by comparing their complaint to an untrained puppy, somehow winning them back. People started whispering again, but differently this time. The barefoot girl was becoming something else, unpredictable, maybe even resourceful. And Derek noticed. He didn't say much, he never did, but his eyes followed her. Through the glass wall of his office, he watched how she spoke with staff, how she handled pressure, how she laughed off humiliation instead of letting it crush her. She unsettled him. No one unsettled Derek Crawford. But if he was beginning to see value, someone else saw a threat. Rebecca Hartwell, senior manager of finance. 8 years at ZNK, polished like glass with a resume that dripped prestige. She cornered Blair by the copier one afternoon, her smile sharp as a knife. So, Rebecca said, folding her arms, you're the famous newcomer everyone's buzzing about. Blair kept her tone polite. Just doing my best. Oh, I know who you are, Rebecca replied sweetly. The girl who walked barefoot into an interview. How brave. Blair forced a smile. Thank you. I like to think of it as breaking paradigms. Rebecca's smile flickered, the edges cracking. Tell me, Blair, how does someone with your background end up working so close to the CEO? Blair tilted her head. Maybe because he needed someone who knows the difference between competence and arrogance disguised as professionalism. The silence between them was electric. Rebecca's eyes flashed, but before she could retort, Derek's office door opened. He stepped out, his gaze flicking between the two women. "Everything all right?" His voice was calm, but Blair noticed how Rebecca straightened like a child caught with her hand in the cookie jar. "Nothing serious," Rebecca said quickly. "Just welcoming our new colleague." "Enlightening conversation," Blair added with mock innocence. Derek studied them for a moment, then handed Blair a folder. "I need these reports reviewed by the end of the day." Without waiting for an answer, he disappeared back inside. Rebecca's smile returned, brittle this time. "This conversation isn't over," she whispered before walking away. Blair exhaled slowly, her heart hammering. She had made her first real enemy. Later that week, the elevator incident happened. Blair and Derek, trapped between the 10th and 9th floors, the hum of stalled machinery filling the silence. At first, panic clawed at her chest. But then instinctively, she cracked a joke about finally having a good excuse to be late for lunch, if they survived. Derek stared at her like she had grown a second head, then, impossibly, laughed. A real laugh, the kind that stripped away years of armor. "You're not like anyone I've ever worked with," he admitted. Still deciding if that's a compliment, Blair teased, though her stomach twisted at the strange warmth in his eyes. When the elevator finally jerked back to life, they both stepped out, but something had shifted. There was a thread between them now, invisible but unbreakable, and Rebecca saw it. She began watching more closely, eyes sharp as razors. She noticed Derek's lingering glances, Blair's irreverent humor that somehow slipped past his defenses. She smelled blood in the water. 3 days later, Blair arrived at her desk to find an envelope with no sender. Inside, a single sheet of paper with jagged words typed in bold, "You don't belong here." Blair's hands trembled as she folded the note and tucked it into her bag. Fear coiled low in her stomach, but so did determination. Whoever had written it, Rebecca or someone else, they weren't going to chase her out. She'd fought too hard, lost too much, to let an anonymous threat win. But even as she told herself that, she couldn't shake the truth pressing down on her chest. Someone in this building wanted her gone, and they weren't playing games anymore. The warning note in her bag hadn't left Blair's mind. It whispered at her in the quiet moments, its jagged black letters haunting her like a shadow she couldn't outrun. Still, she pushed forward, clinging to the scraps of dignity she had left. She had survived humiliation, whispers, broken heels, and even an elevator breakdown with her impossible boss. But nothing could have prepared her for what was coming next. The disaster struck on a Tuesday morning. Blair walked into the office balancing 2 coffees, one for herself, one for Derek, when the atmosphere hit her like a wall. Conversations hushed the second she entered. Heads swiveled. Laughter died halfway through. Her pulse quickened. Something was wrong. She reached her desk and found another envelope waiting for her. Hands trembling, she ripped it open. A stack of glossy photographs spilled across the wood like evidence in a courtroom. Her breath caught. It was her and Derek. Walking out of a restaurant late at night, Derek's hand brushing her back, him leaning close, saying something that had made her laugh. The most damning photo of all, Derek kissing her forehead outside her building. The note beneath them read only one line. "Your secret is out." Blair's stomach twisted. Her eyes darted around the office. Had anyone seen these yet? Her answer came when Jake from finance approached, his face full of pity. "Blair, I thought you should know. These photos are circulating. Everyone's seen them." Her legs nearly gave out. Her private moments weren't private anymore. They were gossip, proof, ammunition. By noon, the storm had spread through every corridor of ZNK. Whispers followed her like a plague. She slept her way in. Of course, the CEO chose her. Barefoot at the interview. And now this? Blair wanted to scream, to defend herself, but every word she imagined sounded hollow in the face of those photos. The summons came at 2 o'clock. Sarah from HR appeared at her desk, her expression unreadable. "The board wants to see you, now." Blair followed her into a conference room that felt colder than a morgue. Inside, the board members sat in a semicircle, their faces grim. Charles Morrison, the chairman, leaned forward, hands clasped. "Miss Evans," he began, "it has come to our attention that you are involved in an inappropriate relationship with Mr. Crawford." Blair's mouth went dry. Patricia Wells, the vice president, cut her off, sliding a photograph across the table. "The evidence is here. This behavior is unacceptable. It undermines the integrity of this company." Blair stared at the image of Derek pressing his lips to her forehead. Heat flooded her face, part shame, part rage. "With all due respect," she said, her voice shaking, "my personal life doesn't erase the work I've done here. I earned my place. I saved the Hamilton contract." "Your intentions are irrelevant," Charles snapped. "Perception is everything. and the perception is disastrous. The door opened. Derek walked in. His presence filled the room like thunder. He took in the scene with one glance, his jaw tightening when he saw the photos on the table. "What's going on?" His voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. "Derek," Charles said, "these have surfaced. The board is concerned about favoritism, legal implications." "My personal life is not company business," Derek cut in, his tone razor sharp. Patricia's lips thinned. "When it affects your ability to lead impartially, it becomes our business." Blair's chest heaved. She couldn't let him take the fall for her. She rose from her chair, her voice breaking as it spilled out. "It's true," she said. "We're in a relationship, but I never asked for special treatment. I've worked for everything I've accomplished here. If you want my resignation, take it, but don't insult me by pretending my work doesn't matter." The room froze. Derek turned slowly, his eyes locking onto hers with something fierce and unshakable. Then he faced the board. "If someone leaves," he said, his voice like a blade, "it won't be her, it'll be me." Gasps rippled through the room. "Derek," Charles said, aghast. "Be reasonable." "This is my reason," Derek shot back. "Blair Evans saved a multi-million-dollar contract this quarter. She has more initiative and courage than half the people in this building. If you can't see her value beyond gossip, then maybe I'm not the CEO you need." The silence that followed was suffocating. Blair's eyes stung with tears. She had never seen anyone defend her like that, not even herself. But even as Derek's words settled like a bomb across the boardroom table, Blair's heart twisted with dread. Because she knew what he was risking, his title, his empire, the life he had built brick by brick, for her. And for the first time, Blair wondered if love could cost too much. Blair couldn't breathe as she left the boardroom. The walls of ZNK's glass tower felt like they were closing in, whispers following her every step. She clutched her bag tightly, but her hands trembled so badly the strap slipped through her fingers twice before she made it to the elevator. Behind her, Derek's voice echoed, still arguing with the board, still defending her, for her. But that was exactly the problem. He was risking everything, his reputation, his company, for a woman who had shown up barefoot to her interview. By the time she stepped onto the street, the city air felt thick, unkind. She pulled out her phone and typed a short note, her chest aching with every word. "I need time to think. Don't look for me." She left it on Derek's desk, her final act of cowardice, or maybe of mercy, and walked away. For 3 days she disappeared. She ignored his calls, dodged his visits to her apartment. When her neighbor, Mrs. Rossetti, mentioned Derek had come knocking, Blair nearly broke down. "He's the big fish, huh?" the old woman said with her usual bluntness. "Men like that don't chase after sardines unless it matters." Blair had smiled weakly, but inside, she was falling apart. On the 4th day, Derek finally found her. He followed her to the community center in Ballard, the modest building where Blair volunteered with kids whenever she needed to clear her head. From the doorway, he watched as she sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by laughing children, reading aloud in a dozen different voices. She was radiant there, more herself than she ever seemed to be inside the steel walls of ZNK. When the kids ran off for snack time, Blair spotted him. The light in her eyes dimmed. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice low, wary. "Looking for you," Derek said simply. "I told you not to," she whispered. He stepped closer. "And you know I don't follow instructions well." She turned away, busying herself with stacking books, but her hands shook. "You shouldn't be here. The board's ready to crucify you and the whole company thinks I'm sleeping my way up." "Let them," Derek said, his voice steady, though his eyes betrayed the storm inside him. "I don't care what they think. Not anymore." Blair spun to face him, tears brimming. "That's the problem. You should care. This is your life, Derek, your company. You've spent years building this empire and you're willing to burn it all down. For me?" "Yes," he said without hesitation. The certainty in his voice left her reeling. She shook her head. "That's insane." "No," Derek countered, his voice rising. "What's insane is thinking I can go back to the way things were before you. You think I had a life before you walked into my office barefoot? I didn't. I had a routine, numbers, meetings, silence. You gave me chaos and laughter and—" His voice cracked for the first time. "Something real." Blair's chest tightened. "But what if it destroys you?" He closed the space between them, his eyes burning. "Then at least I'll go down fighting for the one thing that was worth it." Her lips parted, but no words came. For the first time, Blair saw not the arrogant CEO, not the man who had dismissed her on the sidewalk, but someone broken, someone human, someone who had built walls so high he'd forgotten how to feel until she came crashing through them. And then he did something she never expected. He dropped to one knee. Blair froze. The children's laughter outside the window faded, the hum of the city silenced. All she could hear was her own heartbeat as Derek reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "I've made calculated decisions my entire life," he said, his voice raw. "Every choice measured, every risk weighed. But this..." He flipped the box open, revealing a simple, elegant ring that gleamed in the dim light. "This is the first irrational decision I've ever made. Blair Evans, will you marry me?" Her knees nearly buckled. "Derek, you've lost your mind. You're in the middle of a corporate scandal, your board wants you gone, and you're..." "I've never been more certain of anything," he interrupted. His eyes searched hers, steady and unflinching. "They can take the company. They can take the title. But if I lose you, that's the real failure." Tears spilled down Blair's cheeks. "People will say it's too fast, that you're crazy." "Let them," Derek said softly. "They've said worse about me, but they'll never be able to say this isn't love." Blair let out a trembling laugh, half sob, half disbelief. "You are the most stubborn, impulsive man I've ever met. Is that a yes?" His voice cracked on the question, betraying just how much it meant. Blair looked at the ring, then at him, kneeling there in a pressed suit on the dusty floor of a community center classroom. The CEO who once thought her unworthy now asking her to be the most important part of his life. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking into a smile. "Yes, Derek Crawford. It's a yes." The ring slipped onto her finger, fitting as though it had always belonged there. He rose, pulling her into a kiss that stole the breath from her lungs, sealing a promise neither boardroom scandal nor whispered rumor could ever destroy. And for the first time since she'd run barefoot through the city streets, Blair Evans felt certain she wasn't running anymore. She was exactly where she was meant to be.